About out of hell. It's question 3, and I call on the Honourable Member for Douglas Central, Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I beg leave to ask the Minister for Infrastructure, pursuant to his answers provided on 27th October 2020, why Bus Vannin has not adopted the Confederation of Passenger Transport voluntary code of practice for the use and acceptance of mobility scooters and low-floor buses, and why Bus Vannin will not allow Class 2 mobility scooters on its buses.
On the Minister for Infrastructure to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, every passenger boarding a bus has the right to know that the bus is safe for them to travel on. All Bus Vannin vehicles are constructed to UN ECE Regulation 107 standards, which apply in 41 countries and are developed through research and testing. And for those who are not familiar, UN ECE is the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. Regulation 107 concerns the uniform provisions concerning the approval of Category M2 or M3 vehicles with regard to their general construction, and M2 and M3 vehicles are coaches and buses. So those are the international standards that apply to construction of buses and coaches. The Confederation of Passenger Transport voluntary code that the Honourable Member Mr Thomas refers to is a voluntary code which has been adopted by some UK bus and coach operators. However, Mr Speaker, it does not adhere to those international standards, UN ECE Reg 107. It would therefore be inappropriate for us to adopt the code. The Department will wait until the international standards for both the construction of a mobility scooter and the on-bus restraint measures are set before allowing that type of operation. In the meantime, Bus Vannin will continue to operate with the high standards of safety that are expected.
Supplementary question, Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Would the Minister confirm that this CPT code was actually developed in conjunction with the UK government, which is the member of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, and it's been used by nearly all bus companies across, so it can't be some sort of dodgy code? Secondly, would the Minister confirm that buses, at least one bus sold from Bus Vannin, has been used across under this code without any adaptation, and therefore why can't the other Bus Vannin use its buses before it sells them without any adaptation despite this code?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I can confirm that the code is in use and has been adopted in the UK. However, I think Mr Thomas's statement that nearly all bus companies have adopted it is not something I can agree with. My understanding is that it covers only 21,000 of the 70,000 buses and coaches in the UK, and almost half of those 21,000 that are covered by it operate in London, which is clearly a very different environment to that of the Isle of Man, in particular in terms of the speed at which the buses travel, and that is relevant given the size and weight of such mobility scooters and the potential impact should an incident arise which leads to the mobility scooter being thrown around in the bus. Now that is a risk, and that's something that we have to be mindful of. Secondly, Mr Thomas refers to one bus being sold to an operator in the UK and used within this code, and I don't have proof of that, but I understand that to be the case. It does not, however, mean that that bus is suitable for use in that manner, nor indeed that the operator is delivering a safe travel experience for all its passengers. It just means that an operator has bought a second-hand bus and is using it in that context.
Supplementary question, Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Would the Minister confirm that Centre Bus, it doesn't operate in London, and it's operating in an environment that's quite like the Isle of Man, I believe? Secondly, would the Minister confirm that he's happy with that perspective as a politician in the light of the public sector equality duty to keep an open mind, which was reinforced after the third oversight of the imposition of the Equality Act obligations to treat everybody fairly in terms of public transport was overruled by Tim Wool last Tuesday?
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much. I will take both parts of Mr Thomas's question, but deal with the first part first. If you could clarify, Mr Thomas, your reference to Centre Bus and operating in an area that's quite like the Isle of Man. Which area does he believe is quite like the Isle of Man? Because I think the Isle of Man's unique.
A Centre Bus doesn't operate in London. It's not carrying passengers at slow speed between urban stops.
So you've told me, Mr Thomas, where it's not operating. I'd like to know where it is operating.
Right, we're not going to have it. This isn't a back and forward. If Minister, maybe you could just move on to the second part of the question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The second part of the question is of very significant importance, and it's a difficult issue to solve. We have people who are reliant on mobility scooters, we have people who are reliant on buses, and there is much more work to be done between the department and the Equality Advisor and the Equality Champion to move the situation forward. I'll be the first to acknowledge that where we are currently is not where we need to be, and my department is committed to moving this issue forward. However, like many things, Mr Speaker, this isn't a simple fix. Accessibility as a principle is something that the department is already demonstrating with its work, for example, on rolling out more accessible bus stops across the island, which is a major investment in both time and finance. And we are currently working with the Equality Champion and her advisor to introduce equality provisions potentially via the Road Traffic Legislation Bill 2020, which is in front of Legislative Council currently, and we are in discussion about some amendments which would then potentially, if approved, lead to modifications to the Road Transport Act 2001, and that would be the first element and the fundamental element of introducing equality provisions to the transport sector in regard of public passenger vehicles. However, there is much more work to be done, Mr Speaker. It is complex, and we can't solve it immediately. If it was easy, it would have been done by now. Consideration has to be given to the needs of all the travelling public, and it is likely that introducing mobility scooters onto buses would require some compromises around those aspects, and those things need to all be looked at in the round.
Supplementary question, Mr Hooper.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The Minister mentioned UNECE 107. I'd be grateful if you could point to the very specific section of that code that prohibits the carrying of Class 2 mobility scooters on low-floor buses. I can't see anything in that code that actively prohibits the carrying of these scooters. Secondly, he's conflating two issues. He's talking about we're going to fix this with legislative change, but he's also said the buses can't carry these things safely. Well, how does changing the law enable a bus to carry it safely? What is it in the law that is preventing his department making reasonable adjustments to the buses to enable these scooters to be carried safely?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As I said, this is a complex issue. Mr Hooper has obviously studied the UNECE 107 regulations, and I take it from his comments that it's not a specific prohibition. It's the way those regulations work, and we would have to modify the bus in order to adapt it to carry the mobility scooter, and there is no standard for the construction of a mobility scooter. So we could have a whole variety of different scooters, all of which would bring different challenges to allow them to be compatible with buses. Current designs don't have anchor points, for example, that a restraint could be attached to, and the issue is compounded by the fact that mobility scooters have a higher centre of gravity compared with a wheelchair. So this is a complicated area. I am committed to the department addressing it and coming forward with some proposals, but I'm not going to I'm not going to make commitments until I fully know the implications of those commitments and what effect it has on the safety of passenger transport on the island and the operation of the bus and coach service.
Supplementary question, Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Would the Minister confirm his answer of October, which, whereas the centre bus use is without any adjustments, so it's not a question of reasonable adjustments. Secondly, can the Minister take this as an opportunity to actually identify Class 1, Class 2 and Class 3 mobility device user categories, because they are clearly defined, contrary to what the Minister's just said. And thirdly, for the benefit of the next few weeks, can the Minister outline very specifically what screening of Bus Vannin policies and procedures the department or Bus Vannin has done for equality impact, what assessments it's done after that screening, and whether the Minister is happy to stand up to defend his Equality Act compliance in coming months.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Again, just take issue with the point made by Mr Thomas that whatever Centrebus have done is a matter for Centrebus. It doesn't imply that you can safely adapt your buses to carry these mobility scooters in a safe and responsible manner. So those questions you should be asking of Centrebus in whichever area of the UK they operate. I've said very clearly from my answer that this is an area that needs much further work. I'm quite happy to engage with this, to take it forward. I've said explicitly we cannot stay where we are. We need to move it forward, and the issues that Mr Thomas has raised, I'm quite happy to pick up and update this Honourable House in due course when I've got clarity on this complex issue.
Supplementary question, Ms Edge.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And just to continue on the theme of equality impact assessments, can the Minister confirm when he's just recently purchased 2 years' worth of new buses that an equality impact assessment was done, and why were these not compatible?
Minister to reply.
The bus replacement policy is an ongoing matter, and I think the Honourable Member is probably referring to the hybrid buses that we've just bought as part of our adaptation to climate change. As I've said, this is a complex
Quality
issue.
impact assessment.
Quality impact assessment. In what regard?
No, Minister, you just have to answer about whether an equality impact assessment has been undertaken regarding the purchase of the new buses. I really can't be having members having a conversation across the floor for the morning.
I'm happy to clarify and update honourable members accordingly.
Thank you. Supplementary question, Mrs Christian.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Obviously, this is a very emotive subject, and I appreciate this affects a lot of people. Will the Minister will the Minister commit to looking forward in the future for the Department to buying vehicles that are able to safely carry mobility scooters, all mobility scooters, when they are available to buy one from our suppliers? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think that's a very fair question from the honourable member, and when those vehicles are available, when the standards are in place, so that we know there is some standardisation around mobility scooters, that will give us the ability to do that. And I'm happy that we embrace the principle of inclusivity into our bus service, but we have to deal with the landscape in which we are, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Mr Hooper.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Actually, it's the same question that I asked the Minister earlier. Which sections of the legislation actively prohibit his department from making any adjustments that are necessary to the buses to carry mobility scooters, specifically Class 2 mobility scooters? The reason I ask this is because I'd also like the Minister to confirm that there is, in fact, no legal prohibition on the buses carrying Class 2 mobility scooters. In fact, the buses we use on our routes are used elsewhere in the world, notably in the United Kingdom on very similar routes. So I'm really struggling to understand what the Minister's issue is here. There is nothing in law that says you can't do this. There is nothing in common sense, it would appear, that says you can't do this. There is a standard code that has been adopted by a large number of UK bus companies, which does set out standard sizes, conditions, measurements for Class 2 mobility scooters that meet the conditions of that code. So really the Minister is bouncing around everywhere with all these different arguments. It's not legal, there's no standard. We have to wait for new buses. Which one of these things is it actually, Minister?
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much. Well, I think my original answer, Mr Speaker, made it very clear that all our buses are constructed to the UN ECE standards, and
It doesn't prohibit anything.
This code, which Mr Thomas is advocating that we adopt, which has been adopted by a minority of UK bus operators. The majority haven't operated this, and those that have are operating in different environments. The code does not adhere to accepted international standards. So therefore, that's the prime reason that we're not able to adopt it now. But I've committed to look at this. I've committed to update this Honourable House, Mr Speaker. And that's what I will do.
Final supplementary, Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Would the Minister confirm then that no Equality Act impact assessment has been done for the new buses since the Equality Act came into force? Secondly, would the Minister confirm that nobody's looking to have Class 3 mobility scooters, which are the ones that have to be registered and are road going and go up to 8 miles per hour? The simple choice is to have Class 1 and Class 2 mobility devices, which can only go on pavements up to 4 miles per hour, don't need to be registered, on buses, like wheelchairs, like prams. Does the Minister also, is the Minister also aware, can he confirm that he's aware, that the CPT code covers priority? It involves training for the users, it involves registration, it involves making arrangements, specific ad hoc arrangements to help mobilities. It sounds to me like the Minister's prepared to go to an equality tribunal actually with no knowledge of the current situation and defend an absolutely ridiculous position. Does the Minister agree?
Minister's reply.
No, I don't agree, Mr. Speaker.
Please like and subscribe to the Isle of Man TV channel. Thank you.